Hey fearsome friends, tonight I have 10 spooky woods stories for you. And now the weather is cooling a little, my channel catchphrase is becoming more fitting. Thank you all for your continued support, and without further ado, sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. Now this wasn't an encounter that I had with a person, but rather something I found with my kiddo in the woods. It was hair, about 20 inches of human hair in the campfire ring. I spotted it right away because it was so unusual and it stood out. It wasn't burned, but carefully put under 3 or 4 medium-sized rocks. I moved the rocks and used a big stick to investigate, hoping I wouldn't see a scalp or skin included, and hoping it was a wig and someone thought they were being funny. But no. It was specifically blonde hair with a washed-out blue dye going halfway through it. I tried to turn it over using the stick as much as I could, making sure it wasn't attached to anything, and it smelled rotten. It was definitely the creepiest thing I've ever come across in the woods. It was so unsettling, in fact, that I reported it to the sheriff's department, because I felt the authorities should know. I talked to a deputy and sent him the pictures I had taken, with detailed instructions on how to get to the campsite. I've had no follow-up from them so far, but it totally ruined our Sunday drive. Now, I don't know if someone had shaved their head and were howling at the moon in the woods or what, but it was disturbing for sure. The next day, I picked up my friend after work and drove back to the campsite. We pulled up next to the fire pit, just as before, and I could tell the hair had been disturbed since I'd last seen it, hopefully because the sheriff's deputy had gone to check it out. I'd brought disposable gloves with me this time though, because I wanted to make sure I investigated it thoroughly. But I think what bothered me the most about yesterday is that I hadn't probed further after smelling the rotten odor. Picking up the hair, it was definitely an entire head's worth, and about 16 inches long, blonde, wavy, and with washed-out blue dye halfway up. There weren't intact roots, pieces of skin, or any scalp visible at either ends. Phew. But it definitely looked like freshly cut hair. I also didn't smell what I had previously, the rotten, decaying smell. And there were no little animals sacrificed underneath, or evidence of blood in the immediate area. However, human remains have been found in that gulch before, back in 2019. It was a skull without teeth and some other bones and tissue. Now I know I mentioned trafficking as a possible explanation, and was grasping at straws because I was so creeped out. But our state really does have a huge problem with missing and murdered Indigenous women. The numbers are absolutely obscene. A recent case that comes to mind is a 2 or 3-year-old little girl that hadn't been seen since March, and they didn't report her as missing until June. I've still had no follow-up, and to say it's very sad is an understatement. The Native Americans here are very much considered the criminals or junkies, especially with law enforcement, and very few get the support they need. I'm not trying to start a debate or hurt any feelings, but if you want more info, look up the MMIW movement. I must say I'm glad I went back and investigated further. I am so relieved that I didn't see roots or a scalp or worse. I've just chalked it up to someone needing to go to the woods and shave their head, and they just left their hair to get exactly the reaction that I had. I was out with my girlfriend Sunday evening for a walk in the park, when I suggested we try a new trail on the way. The entrance of the park is a narrow trail with tall grass on both sides that leads deeper into the woods, and after a few minutes of walking, we noticed a tall man wearing a white tank top and shorts standing alone on the trail, looking at us. I whispered to my girlfriend that that's not creepy at all, and proceeded to take a different path at the fork ahead of us. We continued on a trail that ended up taking us onto a narrower path with trees on both sides, and as we were walking in a file, my girlfriend leading the way, I suddenly heard something like a branch snapping behind us, which made me stop to listen. But I shortly concluded it was just an animal or a coincidence. It was now starting to get nearly pitch black, so we had to turn on the flashlight on our phones and decided to head back before it was too dark. I was now walking in front, and it just took a few steps before I was face to face with the guy in the white tank top that we'd seen earlier. He was sneaking behind us with no light on, following us in the dark. So I shone my light towards him, and he looked like a deer in headlights, like someone who'd gotten caught red-handed. My fist was instinctively clenched, and I had a really bad feeling about him. I was sure it was going to go south, and was ready for a fight. However, as we approached to go past him, he said, "Good evening." I replied with a confident good evening to show him no fear, and continued on our way back. I looked back after a few steps, and he was still standing at the spot where we'd passed him, and he was looking in our direction. I told my girlfriend to go in front, and we ran as fast as we could back to the exit and got in the car. Relieved, we were talking about what had just happened, and realized the intensity of it. A few minutes later, we saw the man walk fast out of the trail. I don't know what he was hiding there, or what was at the end of that trail, but I'm glad we turned back fast. We both felt a bad vibe from him, and believe he was up to no good. This happened 6 years ago now, during the summer of 2015. I was 22 and traveling around in a pickup truck with my dog. Most of the summer that year was glorious, but I had one encounter that has really stayed with me, and it wasn't even with a human. I had spent months traveling, living out of this tent that I had, and had spent a lot of time partying with other travelers, and decided I'd like a week or two alone. I looked on Google Maps and found an abandoned airfield, and being young and cocksure, obviously I decided this barren airfield would be a good place to stay, as it had some woods nearby. I set up camp in an opening of the woods, about 100 meters in from the boundary, which connected it to the airfield. I left my pickup truck on the edge of the woods, and in I went with my camping gear and my dog. My dog was happy enough. He was a very good boy, so I'd let him roam freely without restraint, especially in areas like this where he can't harass farm animals or anything. I had been there for 2 nights, and not had much trouble, but I noticed my dog kept running off in a particular direction, so I finally decided to see what it was, expecting it to be a rabbit hole that he was trying to investigate or something similar. But it wasn't. Instead, about 10 meters away from my camp, hidden under some bushes, were several bin bags full of VHS tapes. None had stickers on or anything to say what they were, but some had been wound to certain places. These definitely looked used and not just blanks. I obviously didn't have the means to play a VHS in the woods, so I left them well alone. But something about them gave me the real creeps. We were at least 30 minutes away from the closest town, and these tapes were deliberately hidden where I found them. I left the area the next morning. This all took place back in the summer of 2006, June to be precise, and in the country of Latvia, which is a small country by the Baltic Sea, northeastern Europe. I was 13 years old at the time, and my sister and I were both part of this archaeology group. During the summer, they would go and do their digs at certain spots, and this particular year was in Rusenica, which is a very remote area deep in the Latvian forests. There were about 30 of us in total, and every morning we would make a 3-kilometer journey to the dig site, including a rowboat ride across a lake to get to it. Over the course of the weeks we were there, we found old bronze rings, a lot of clay from old pottery, and uncovered where there had been old fortifications and other buildings. It was a continuation of their dig from the previous couple of years, and I believe they were still doing it for the next 2 years. A few of my friends and I would often goof around whilst on these digs. We were young boys, so we had a bad attention span for such work. We would wander off into the forest playing war and pushing over old trees, when one day we stumbled upon some carved wood spirits that we thought were odd. After getting back to camp, we were told that there was a wasp's nest near a swim area that we were to use, so we were sent to deal with it with some of the older guys. We got rid of them using deodorant and a lighter, and thinking back to this, it may be what caused what was to come. Later that night I got up. I don't know what time it was, but I needed to pee, so I stepped out of my tent. I slept alone in my tent, and the moon was very large and gave off this great bright glow. But as I was standing there doing my business, I could hear this strange growing wind that I couldn't feel but could hear. It was brushing through the treetops, and that's when I started to have the feeling that I was being watched from the tree line. It was so dark though, I figured I was just being a little paranoid, and just went back to sleep. The next day my sister told me that they'd heard something rustling around mine and their tents that cast a large shadow from the moon, and my sister was in the tent next to mine, but she was there with 2 other girls. They were all older than 16 and 17 at the time, and they were freaked out, and were up until the next morning. The following night I started hearing that strange wind again, and I heard someone in my head say my sister's name, Metra, in a very quiet, raspy, deep, yet feminine voice. After that I cursed this thing, yelling for it to F off, because I'm an idiot, and I put on my headphones so I couldn't hear anything and went to sleep. I remember waking up the next morning feeling very fresh, like I had had the best sleep of my life. But not long after, my sister and her friends walked up to me, looking very concerned. They told me that they had heard these voices too, saying my name, her name, and other people's names in their camp, and every time they'd get a little closer and louder. They said that in the night, the being had walked up to my tent at the front entrance, and I had opened the flap and started begging for forgiveness, asking it to not hurt me and making strange weeping noises. Now I don't remember this, but I trust my sister with my life. She wouldn't lie about something like this. She said they were too scared to leave their tent. The next night things got even more intense, and the voices were louder, to the point that I heard this voice scream my name in that raspy sound, like it was right next to me. Freaked out, I ran to confront whatever it was, thinking maybe it was someone in the camp messing with me. And in the tree line I heard that weird wind, and saw a very large dark mass kind of weaving between the tree line at least 5 meters tall. I ran back into the tent with my sister and her friends, and we all just stayed there until morning, not getting a wink of sleep. We individually all heard these voices calling our names. They would get louder and louder, but only the individual would hear it, not all of us at the same time, which was weird in itself. The next day we did a pagan cleansing ritual to ward off evil spirits using kadikis, which is a type of wood. I'm not sure of the English name for it right now, but we burned it and used the smoke around the campsite, and it worked. There were other things that happened too, and I later found out as the word spread through the camp of what had gone on that year prior. The same thing had apparently happened to one of the seniors of the camp, and he had freaked out at night and run out of his tent crying because of this voice. The dig was on an old pagan graveyard near the ruins too. It was a very strange experience, and I haven't heard of these types of experience talked about much, so I decided to share my story here and just have it as testimony, a memory of what it was like, and maybe someone can help me understand it better. We believe it was an angry forest spirit, and my sister to this day is scared of tall trees. She told me only last year that she still thinks about it and is scared that it will come find her again someday. She was quite traumatized by it, but I didn't really feel that affected at the time. I started being weird about it after a few years, when it had finally sunk in, and I wondered what it looked like when it was in front of my tent and I was begging it to not hurt me. Was I so traumatized from this that my mind had blocked it out? I don't know. But I want to go back to Rusenica again one day and pay it my respects, because I feel it taught me a life lesson. I grew up in a small city in southern Virginia called Hopewell. A real shithole, honestly. It's known throughout the Tri-Cities as Dopewell for a reason. Deep in the woods a few miles behind the high school was an old dilapidated mansion known as Bulldog Mansion. I have no idea why. None of my friends did either. That's just what it was always called, and we used it as a safe spot to smoke pot after school. The mansion and the woods it resided in have since been cleared out, and a new neighborhood is now in its place. But my story happened in 2002 when it still stood. It was around 5 p.m.-ish after school, and my friends and I were doing our usual thing of hanging out in the main hall, passing a bowl, talking about dumb stuff and joking and whatnot. It was early winter, so the sun was already setting when we were all ready to head out, and one of my friends, let's call him Jay, had already walked out through the front door. But then he poked his head back in and whispered to, "Come check this out." We all followed him outside to find a guy some 30 feet away, squatting in the tall grass with his back to us. Hopewell still has a bit of a homeless problem to this day, and I'm still convinced this guy was just cracked out of his mind. There were 4 of us, and I'm kind of a petite girl, but my 3 friends were all on the football team, so we weren't afraid to approach him. And in hindsight, it's still a stupid thought to have had. As we walked closer, I noticed he was mumbling to himself some of the most vile things I've ever heard. I froze in place in a total state of WTF, but my friends kept approaching. They stopped a few feet behind him, and Jay said, "Hey bud, everything all right?" He didn't respond to Jay, but lowered his mumbling to an almost whisper. One of the other guys, we'll call him Ray, then made the bold move to place a hand on the guy's shoulder and said, "Dude, you okay?" Now keep in mind I was stoned off my ass and was thinking the most paranoid things like, this guy's going to start stabbing us. So as soon as Ray had touched the guy's shoulder, he leapt up and screamed at him, then took a swing at Ray. My first thought was that he had a knife, so I immediately let out a blood-curdling scream, which is very out of character for me. Then Ray ducked the swing as the other 2 recoiled back, exclaiming their WTFs. The man immediately took off sprinting into the tree line before any of us could react. Then all 3 of them looked back at me with uncomfortable laughs. As we walked back, scanning all around us to make sure he wasn't following, my friends were all talking tough, but I could tell they were just as freaked out as I was. None of us ever wanted to use Bulldog as our spot anymore, and I never went back there again before it got demolished. My thoughts on the hobos since then have been that he was probably using the mansion to squat and shoot up in, and wasn't too pleased a bunch of teenagers were invading his space. So about a year ago, I went to this party in the woods. We had a fire and there was a bunch of us, all about 18 to 21 years old, and were having some drinks and smoking some weed. We live in a very small area, so the only method of fun for people our age group around here specifically is bonfires in the woods with alcohol, marijuana, playing with Ouija boards in old cemeteries, or driving around. I'd had a drink and was buzzing from taking a few hits off of a dab pen, and everything was going great with my friends T, N, B, I, and K. There were quite a few other people there too, but what we didn't know was that this guy, CH, had brought what we now think was DMT. We had told everyone no hard drugs since we didn't want to get into serious trouble in case the party got busted, but he had brought them anyway. All of a sudden, he started screaming and took off at a sprint into the woods. Obviously really alarmed and not wanting his screaming to somehow get anyone to overhear from outside of the party and call the police, my friends and I took off after him into the woods, along with this other guy who Will called Jay. A good portion of people panicked at his screaming, and they got into their cars and sped off through the woods, back towards the main road as quickly as they could. The crazy guy, CH, just kept screaming and running around, faster than what seemed like anybody physically could, because none of us were catching up with him. Finally, my friend K and I got lucky, or unlucky depending on how you see it, and CH ended up running right to where we were. I was standing at the bottom just over this small embankment, and K was standing at the top in direct line with CH. As soon as CH saw him, he literally ran at my friend K on all fours, apparently very quickly too, according to K, as I couldn't quite see everything over the embankment. K took off like a bat out of hell, and CH chased after him for a bit, all while continuing to scream. Eventually K got away and CH once again kept running through the forest. My friends and I decided to give up trying to catch him, and tried to come up with another plan. We all met by the fire where the party had been held. We were the only people left at the party, along with maybe 4 others. We were trying to decide if we either needed to call the cops and get out of there, or if we should wait until he came back to camp once whatever he was on had worn off. We chose the second option. So we waited, and eventually he came close enough to the camp where one of the other 4 people that were with us tackled him and brought him into where we were staying for the night, restraining him because he kept trying to get away and started screaming again. After a while he was fine, but whatever he'd taken made him run really fast on all fours, charge at people, and it made him be able to run faster than any of us could. Maybe this isn't the creepiest story to some of you, but it was really scary in person, watching some sort of unknown drug make somebody freak out like that. He was screaming like he was on fire, and we had to restrain him. Anyone who has seen somebody freak out on drugs will know how creepy it truly is. This guy wasn't even himself, and he acted like he was a man possessed or something. All of us were truly afraid he was going to attack one of us. I just got home from my daily walk in the forest, so this just happened. I like to walk this dirt trail that cuts through the forest about half a mile from my house. It's in the middle of the city, so even though it feels secluded and gives me the sense of connecting with nature, there's still the chance of running into some interesting humans, although I prefer wild deer. I usually go much later in the evening, and I'm usually the only person on the 1.5 mile long trail. But today I went earlier, and to my dismay I saw a man in casual business attire enter the trail ahead of me. At one point I saw him look back, and then burst into this joyful run. I wasn't going to judge, because I've full-on skipped on this trail before, as I'm a 48-year-old man-child. I saw that ahead of him there was a woman with a baseball-style cap on, just standing at my favourite spot on the trail. The forest canopy opens up there, and it just feels different. I had a magical meeting with large stag on summer solstice just weeks ago. But at any rate, I noticed once he'd gotten to her, he stopped and talked for a bit. For whatever reason, it just seemed odd. And then he walked on, where he then came to a guy and his boys walking together. He stopped them and talked to them for a moment too, and I thought to myself, he's giving them a heads up about her, I bet. I wondered if she'd propositioned him. Then I arrived at her location on the trail, where I always break off a bundle of black locust thorns. I'm pagan, so I carry them for spiritual protection, and I'm a little guy, so I carry them for physical protection as well. I pulled an earbud out and said hello to her. She looked fairly normal, in her late 40s maybe, decently dressed, long dark wavy hair with grey in it, a baseball hat with a buffalo on it, and she was wearing one sandal and carrying the other. She said hi back and just kind of stared at me. I said, "How are you?" "Okay," she said sadly. Then I just kept on walking. I walked to the end of the trail and into a park, and then made my way back. About a half an hour had passed when I turned around and headed back the way I came. When I rounded the corner, I could see she was still standing there, holding her sandal in her hand, and when I got to her this time, she said, "You look like my friends." I was thinking in my head that's plural. Then she said, "Yes, several of them, mixed together." I laughed at that, and then she said, "There's that laugh." I asked her if she was lost or needed help. She said she was supposed to meet a friend, but they weren't there. She thought if she left, they would think she'd ditched them. I asked her what time they were supposed to meet, and she replied, "No specific time." She asked me where the trail came out, so I explained it would exit by the river, and told her where she came in was next to a park. Maybe that's where they were supposed to meet, and she'd turned too soon. She smiled oddly, and said that happens a lot in her life, turning too soon. I laughed and said I totally understood. She stopped smiling and then said, "There's that laugh again." I asked her if she was on something. Not that I cared, but I just wanted to help. She said yes, and I asked, "Mushrooms?" She replied enthusiastically, "Mushrooms? Yes, I'm quite hungry. Can I walk with you through the forest?" I let her know that was fine, and we walked about 20 feet, her one sandal in her hand. Then she stopped suddenly. "Are the rocks hurting your foot?" I asked her. "They feel like you'd think rocks feel on a foot. I can't feel pain anymore." "Be careful," I said. "There's many black locust trees all along here, and the thorns are huge. You don't want to step on them." "How do you know about these trees?" she asked. So I explained I was pagan, and the meaning behind the thorns, and I asked if she was going to keep forward or going back to the park. "I thought we were going to your dad's house," she said, with feet planted and not wanting to move. I explained that I hadn't mentioned my father, and that I was going home, but she was still welcome to walk with me if she wished. She took another 10 or 15 steps, and then stopped suddenly like she was afraid to keep going. I said, "I don't know what your ultimate destination is, but there is nothing wrong with enjoying the forest. The deer will be out soon, and they're good company. I'm going to continue walking home. You can go either direction to get out. I walk this trail every day. If I see you tomorrow, I'll say hello." I put my headphones back in and continued on my walk, and a deer and her fawn were at the end of the trail eating berries. I turned around and the woman was in the same spot, just standing there, staring back at me. Now I didn't want to call the police, because if she was on a hallucinogenic drug, which I think she was, it would wear off eventually, and she wasn't in any harm that I could see. There was a woman with a dog walking into the trail as I walked out, so I let her know there was a confused lady on the trail who seemed harmless, but I thought it best she be prepared, and she thanked me. It creeped the hell out of me. I live in Tennessee, and this happened back in early February, March of this year. I live in a near place called Redhead, which is a long stretch of road with railroad tracks, lumber depositing, old mines, and is also known to be haunted, which I don't believe, as I don't believe in ghosts. However, it's also known for cult activity, sacrifices, gang violence, drug dealings, illegal dumping of drugs, sex trafficking, and the activity of the KKK. It's actually one of the only places our local police and state troopers never go out and visit. Now, I had a friend who was also my manager take me and a friend she doesn't really talk to anymore for a drive out there. It is actually a peaceful road with nice nature aside from its horrible background, and this was around 11 at night. Around here that late, the temperature can actually drop to the 30s, and Redhead has a secret road that people take on Halloween, as there's an old jailhouse dating back to the 1900s at least. Some people have actually posted videos and pictures about it before too, many times. My friend drove us out to this jailhouse, and as we were all three young females, I told them it would be safer if we just stayed in the car, as sex trafficking was starting to get really bad at that time, even though my friend carries a gun that she'd gotten from her dad. Now, I regularly get gut feelings about certain things or places, and I had an odd feeling the entire time we were there, like we were being watched. We did a little turnaround at the nature reserve where there are train tracks, and we were listening to some music whilst I kept telling her and her friend that something didn't feel right. I was in the back seat, and I still can't believe I saw it over them. As we were heading up to the tracks to get across to pass the jailhouse, I saw a white blob at first, which I thought was a trick of the car lights, until I saw it was cone-shaped and it was a mask. Someone was staring at us. I told my friend that I saw someone in there, and she stopped the car to flash her lights and even pulled out a flashlight to roll down her window and blink it at them. The person was motionless this whole time, and I was beginning to think that maybe my mind was playing tricks. Until she yelled out that she had a gun, then the person quickly moved away from the window. I told her, and she said she knew, and we drove out of there quickly, seeing no sight of the person. But the story doesn't end there. As we got back on the asphalt road, there in the tree branches in front of us was a white cone-shaped mask that was blowing in the wind, and when we were heading back through, there were signs of masks in the trees. My friend and her friend were actually so scared they wanted me to pray with them. I was the only Christian in the car, and as we crossed the second set of railroad tracks that led into town, there was nothing else. We haven't really been out there ever again since, and while it's good that nothing happened, I can't help but wonder what was going on. Were we about to be in a meeting with them? What was that person doing out there on a cold, dark night, inside an old, abandoned building? And what would have happened if just the three of us would have gone inside the building, not ever seeing the person? It was definitely a night I can't ever forget, along with others. So this is the first of many creepy stories that my roommate and I experienced during our freshman year of college. For context, my best friend and I, Pat, met in high school and roomed together in college. They say don't live with your friends, but we had a lot in common and got along really well, so there were no issues. We were city kids, but we went to college out in the sticks. The campus was secluded from the highway and was surrounded by woods, and our freshman year we shared a typical cinder block dorm room. 2 single beds, 2 desks, 2 dressers, and a closet with no doors, which had a cutout of the top of it for storage containers. There was enough space for someone to climb up and sit up there if they wanted to, and we often did. One night, as usual, we stayed up late talking rubbish for hours. We talked school, dream jobs, girls we liked, what we thought about God, etc., etc., when Pat suddenly changed his tone. He told me that he was having these reoccurring dreams that were freaking him out. In the dream, he was walking in the woods and came across a porcelain doll that, for whatever reason, was very unnerving to him. Every time he went to pick it up, he would suddenly wake up in a panic, like you do when you dream that you're falling. I could see that it was bothering him, but didn't think anything of it. I told him he was probably thinking too much into it, and it would likely pass in time. This was my opinion on the matter, until a few days later, when I started having the same dream. One night we had the dream at the same time, and we both woke up screaming. This happened on Thursday night, and we decided that since the next day was Friday, and we both had a light schedule, we would take our bikes on a ride into the woods near our campus. So Friday came and we did just that. Class ended. We got lunch at the cafeteria and then hopped onto our bikes and rode the trail that led to the woods. Now, since Pat is the most familiar with the dream, he led the way, remarking the whole time of how similar the dream was to the woods we were currently in. We rode for an hour, and we both could feel the tension and the uncomfortable vibes increasing the deeper we went into the trail. Then Pat stopped suddenly and said, "This is it. This is where the doll is. Let's go right." We went maybe a quarter of a mile into the brush, and we found it. It was a porcelain baby doll with a green dress and bonnet. It was an exact match to the dream we were both having. We felt the bad vibes intensify to the point where we were dripping with sweat, even though it was a cool and overcast autumn day. The most unnerving thing was that the doll was in pristine condition, completely unaffected by the dirt and mud around it. The wind blew hard enough to cause our shirts to flare out and our bikes to rattle, but the doll didn't move an inch. Quickly we looked at each other, and without a word spoken, agreed it was time to leave. We hopped on our bikes and took off for the campus. Neither of us could sleep that night, so we put on a movie and took some ZQL, and eventually we passed out. In the early morning hours, we both woke up and heard a girl giggling, both thinking that maybe the other had snuck a girl in, but that wasn't the case. We heard a voice say, "Hey up there," and looked up to the storage cutout above the closet. A red-headed girl in a white dress and an indistinguishable face sat there expressionless. We just stared. In a passive voice she said, "Why did you leave me there?" Neither of us could speak. I managed to mumble out an unsure and quiet, "What?" "You heard me," she said. "Why did you leave me there?" In a flash, everything on the storage cutout fell to the floor and broke open. The noise was unnaturally loud, so loud that it woke our neighbors up next door, who were also good friends. They knocked on the door from the adjoining bathroom and entered the room. We had no way of explaining to them what had happened. We thought that they'd think we were crazy. So we told them we think the base of the cutout broke and dumped our stuff on the floor. They accepted the story, and we spent the remainder of the night cleaning the mess that the redhead girl had left. We never went back into those woods. We never went looking for the doll. But the dream kept occurring, slowly fizzling away. To this day, as close of friends as we are, we don't talk about the doll in the woods and the redhead girl. About a year ago, when I was 17, my friends and I went to a popular tourist attraction park that is alongside a river. The park is connected to bike trails, and the part of the bike trail downtown has a beautiful little scenic route with a lot of history, and there's a staircase that you can sit down on by the water. My friends and I, one a boy and one a girl, decided to walk down from the park, and walk a ways to the staircase to sit by the water. To walk to this water area, you have to go down the bike trail from the park and past a line of trees that surrounds the railroad tracks. It was about 8 p.m. in the summertime, so it was pretty light out still, and many people were out using the trails. Once there, we sat on the stairs and talked for quite a while, when we realized it was dark out, so should probably walk back to the park and back to my car to go home. When we were making our way back, there really weren't a lot of people out, and the trail was really dark at night, so we were using our phone flashlights to navigate. Eventually, we reached the part where the trees and the tracks were, when we heard crunching footsteps in the brush, then a gruffly voice say, "Hey." My other friend, who was the girl, freaked out and just said, "Run." So we started sprinting faster than I think any of us had in our lives, and the boys said, "Why are we running?" I then, barely with breath, said, "I'll tell you later." And as I was looking over my shoulder to tell him this, I saw the old man hobbling down the trail with a weird look on his face. We finally made it to the light of the park, where there were plenty of other people and tourists out enjoying themselves, so we felt safe again, and told our guy friend what had just happened. Needless to say, we were pretty spooked for the rest of the night and were happy to get home. When I got home, I told my dad what had happened, and he told me that that area is actually pretty well known for homeless people and creeps. I'm so glad nothing happened. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.